disruptive.
America that I fought.
Weird thing to happen. Hello, one and all. Welcome to this edition of Kitz Corner. Hope you're having a fantastic day so far. So remember all the talks, the big speeches about how we need to send our resources, our finances, our money over to this Ukrainian war because it's bigger than Ukraine. It's bigger than the people. We are fighting for freedom. We are fighting for democracy. That is the pillars of society. We are fighting against the tyranny of Russia because if they take down Ukrainian democracy, they take down all democracies. And that paranoid propaganda, fear-mongering spewing out of people's mouth. Well, when you look at the reality, look at what's happening now, and by the time you finish this video, you're going to be kicking yourself very, very hard that you utter those words. Because, as you know, it is not fighting democracy. It is not fighting for freedom. Those are the same baseless claims that they said about Afghanistan and Iraq and Libya and Syria. But here's the actual proof to remind people that this war, just like any other war, any proxy war, any U.S. aggression or NATO aggression, is never about the good of society. So, take this for instance, that Zelensky, Mr. Democracy, is nationalizing TV news and restricts opposition parties. This is from March of 2022. So, they immediately turned Ukraine into a martial law dictatorship as this war is going on, saying that anyone that speaks about Russia, anyone that has a different side view on this war, anyone that wants to stop this war, anyone that contradicts the words of the status quo in Ukraine and not fueling this war, you will be silenced out under this new law by Zelensky. Because we're fighting so hard for democracy. Democracy is thriving so much, ladies and gentlemen, over there, that we gotta restrict it for some people. Everyone can't have democracy. It's just too much. It's too much for people to handle. But now he made another big announcement where this is involving upcoming elections. And he was asked on the BBC here of the upcoming election season 2024. What is his take on it? My guess is it's not very democratic, but let's hear what they have to say.
Чи будуть в Україні наступного року вибори?
So, let me back this up because I'll read the subtext here for people that are listening to this. And it says, will there be elections in Ukraine this year? That's what the reporter's asking. And Zelensky says, this is a good question. This is a global question. If we win, there will be. That's his first response. If we win, there will be. Remember when Trump refused to concede the election if he didn't win? Remember that big moment on the debate stage where he said, I'm not gonna concede the election unless I win? And people went haywire, people went nuts, thinking what an absurd thing that was. I was one of those people. I thought it was a crazy thing to say that you wouldn't respect the outcome of the election. You wouldn't respect the people's votes unless you win. That's pretty narcissistic of yourself. So why aren't people outraged about this? Why are people not outraged that he's bigger and more narcissistic than Trump? People are respecting this guy. They're giving Emmys. They're giving Oscars. They're giving media appearances. They're hailing him as some sort of hero. Even though he is even more evil, nefarious prick, more so than Trump. He's saying that we will have an election if I'm declared winner. Let's hear this again.
Чи будуть в Україні наступного року вибори?
This is a global question. If we win, there will be. So there will be no wartime, martial law, no war. Elections should be held in a peacetime when there is no war according to the law. And that's why this is so... So what he's basically saying is that We'll have an election later on when we decide to actually make peace. But since we're never going to actually decide to make peace because we're being pressured by NATO, we're being pressured by Western allies, the United States and Canada and European nations to attack Russia in this proxy war, how we're influenced by the military-industrial complex, there is never going to be a moment's peace. There is never going to be a moment where it's good to have an election. So this is him gaslighting his own people, saying that your democracy is never going to happen. It's never, ever, ever going to happen. This is him saying to his own people. Meanwhile, here in Western nations, we're championing this as some sort of vitriol to fight for democracy. Do you see how lunacy this all is? Do you see the bullshit? And how people should be kicking themselves when they repeat CIA-approved talking points being spewed out by politicians in the mainstream media, thinking that this is some sort of a champion for democracy, for humanity. Do you see how stupid that sounds when you see the actual real reaction, when you actually see it up close? So here's there's this guy, Patrick Henningsen, says the West can now boast how it's fighting for a war for democracy on behalf of its leader who just canceled democracy. That is how propagandized we are, ladies and gentlemen. That is how unbelievably propagandized we are. Thinking that every time we go to war, every time there's a global conflict, every time there's a foreign affairs issue happening, that it's somehow in result of good. Somehow it's in result of the people. It's never about people. It is never about people. They could not care less about humanity. They could not care less about democracy. And as Trump even revealed, that it's about oil. It's about natural resources. It's about hijacking these countries for capital gain. And if we didn't do that, these countries would not even be mentioned in context. We wouldn't even know about Ukraine if there was not some sort of capitalistic goal to this. If it wasn't for the military-industrial complex, NATO, and big corporations like BlackRock investing themselves in this war, we would have no idea about this. No idea. Or here's even, this is Primo Radical, saying Zelensky has said elections are canceled until the war is over. But Ukraine has not had a free election since 2012. Following the US-backed coup, opposition parties and speech were criminalized, and a Nazi genocide began in the Donbass region. This is the history that they're not telling you about Ukraine. This is the stuff that they're telling you that led up to this war that they're purposely not telling you. Why? To misinform you, to build this manufactured aggression towards Russia and make you hate them to go align with the military-industrial complex agenda and NATO and all the oil companies and all the natural gas companies that want to exploit people, exploit for their own gains. And he says the last thing Kiev wants is a democracy. The last thing the neo-Nazis controlled in Ukraine that we know about, we knew about, and we're still funneling money towards them, is a democracy. The last thing they want is for people to have the right of say. Because people having the right to say, they would not choose war. Nobody wants a war to happen. In fact, the most people that want war are the same idiots that will never fight in war. And those are the elected leaders. Those are the globalistic, bloodthirsty tyrants. They're the ones that are screaming for bloody murder to have this war. But no innocent civilian ever wants war to happen. And luckily, there are some people that are willing to speak up. Luckily, there's not everybody being entrenched in this fear-mongering campaign. Because Mick Wallace, just like Claire Daly, of the European Union Parliament has been very vocal about this Ukraine conflict. They have been very vocal about the war powers. And Mick Wallace here is going to explain to you exactly why this war is happening and why it's continuing on. It is not for freedom, it is not for democracy, but it is for a certain investment. And you'll see why in this speech.
The damage to Ukraine is devastating. Towns and cities that endured for hundreds of years don't exist anymore. We must recognise that these towns, cities and surrounding lands were long been stolen by local oligarchs colluding with global financial capital. This theft quickened with the onset of the war in 2014. The pro-Western government opened the doors wide for massive structural adjustment and privatisation programmes spearheaded by the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the IMF and the World Bank. Zelensky used the current war to concentrate power and accelerate the corporate fire sale. He banned opposition parties that were resisting deeply unpopular reforms to the laws restricting the sale of land to foreign investors. Over 3 million hectares of agricultural land are now owned by companies based in Western tax havens. Ukraine's mineral deposits alone are worth over $12 trillion. Western companies are licking their lips. What are the working class people of Ukraine dying for?
And that, my friends, is something you will never hear anywhere in our context. Because our leaders are telling you to shut up, take it as it is, take all of your tax dollars, take all this inflation that you have to deal with, the high cost of living, the fact that you can't afford basic necessities. You have to shove up and take it as it is because it is fighting for democracy. As you're just witnessing here, that is complete crap. That is complete crap. And nothing suits the big, giant oligarch capitalist corporations better than a fascist state. It's easier to control. It's easier to decipher. It's easier to manipulate their governments and take control and occupy governments. And that is what's happening here in Western countries. And now they're trying to export this to Ukraine. They're trying to export this all throughout the world through these proxy wars. Don't believe for a second that it's actually helping these people. That these interventions, that going into these territories, that sending all this tanks, this military arms, all this money is somehow going to help these people. Because it is not. It is not. It's helping the capital. It's helping the bloodthirsty tyrants. It is nowhere helping the innocent civilians. The innocent civilians do not want war to even exist. They just want to live normal, healthy lives, same as Russian people, same as anybody else in the world. But we're told to spew that propaganda and repeat that because somehow it's good for our soul. Remember when Stephen Colbert said that, gas is costing $9 a gallon, but it's worth it because it's cleansing my soul. I know I'm doing something right for Ukraine. Mick Wallace is doing something right with Ukraine. He's actually speaking up for the people. He's actually figuring out why the hell we're in war in the first place. And why this so-called leader, this so-called freedom fighter, this so-called, vitriol of democracy just silenced out the elections. Canceled out completely. And he's saying, well, we'll do it in peacetime. But you and I know, because of people like Julian Assange always points out, that the goal of a war like this, just like Afghanistan, just like Syria, just like any occupied territory that we're in now, it's not about winning the war. It's about continuing to dominate. It's about extending this war as much as possible so that the arms industry, the banks that are investing in this, and everybody else that's capitalizing off the bloodshed and tyranny and the oppression can still continue to thrive on. Whereas innocent civilians are dying every day. As Mick Wallace is pointing out, they're losing their land. They're losing their country. Their country is now taken over by investment bankers. They're eating up the country and selling it off to private equity firms like BlackRock. And what's Zelensky doing? Is he fighting for the people? No. He's, in fact, endorsing people like BlackRock. He's speaking out to JP Morgan. He's speaking out to Goldman Sachs. Buy up my land. Buy up my territory. Like some sort of late-night infomercial. That is the fact, ladies and gentlemen. And it still shakes my head, slap in the face. I had that, head palm moment when I still see people trying to defend this. Again, to say that somehow this is good for humanity. That sending all of our resources, sending all of our finances, and killing off ourselves, taking all of our tax dollars, taking all of our treasury to a neo-Nazi run country is beneficial for the greater good of the global community. It is just absolutely devastating that people still support that when they can obviously see this is a joke under their nose. It's just ridiculous.